Chris Barfoy.
Mr Chair, for a chance to speak to this title and commencement clauses to the Social Housing Reform, Flexible Purchasing and Remedial Matters Bill. Mr Chair, this is one of those stages of the committee stage where we get to proffer up some alternative titles for the piece of legislation. And I've got a pretty simple one, and just one, Mr Speaker, and that's that we change this to Social Housing Reform State House Sell-Off Bill. Because in all reality, that's what this is. It's been a program over time since this government took office to slowly move back to taking any responsibility for any social housing in New Zealand. And I would challenge any member across the side of the House to take a 5-minute call, none of these 30-second calls that they've been taken, to try and say why this is not a State House sell-off bill. Because that is exactly what this is. Mr Chair, part 2 of this bill looked at some of the policy advice that Housing New Zealand will no longer offer to the government. And they have been offering lots of advice to the government over time, because, Mr Chair, these are just some of the advice that Housing New Zealand has offered the government about just one cul-de-sac in Porirua. And it's not whether they should upgrade those houses or look at making sure we do more for those communities, but it's from quotable value. It's getting those houses ready for sale. Yeah. And Mr Speaker, Mr Chair, there's no plan or advice from Housing New Zealand to replace those houses. If anyone in this House wants to come to Calliope Crescent in Cannons Creek, there's a big empty swathe of land there that has been empty, Mr Chair, for about 5 years. And the government promised when those houses were taken away that they'd replace them, that community would flourish again. But nothing has happened. Kids now use it for games of touch because it's a park there now. This government should have stuck to its word and replaced those homes that it bowled over and put houses there for that community to flourish. But no, Mr Chair, there's nothing. Because there's only one side of this equation that the government is interested in, and that's getting rid of state homes. They're not interested in replacing them at all. And that's the cold, hard reality of this government. And they can, and I can hear some interjections, Mr Chair. Those interjections, Mr Chair, are longer than the speeches that side has taken.
Right. Yep.
Longer. So I challenge that member who's interjecting to get up off your feet. If you're so proud of this piece of legislation, get up and take a call. Get up and take a call, or I'll make another invitation. Come to my area and spend just half a day looking around those areas and see how proud you are of the last 7 years of wrecking the Housing New Zealand sector in this country. As I said in my part 1 speech, Mr Chair, I came to this Parliament to protect and build on some of the opportunities that I was given as a child to make sure that I got to the privileged position that I have today. But on that side of the House, Mr Speaker, Mr Chair, they want to keep their privileged position that they've got today for them and their privileged friends. And they don't care about the most vulnerable people in our country who are struggling to make ends meet and have the most simple of rights in this country, and that is a good, safe, warm home, a roof over their heads. Oh, that's too much for this government to ask. And they are, Mr Speaker, they are glossing it up in language of flexibility. And Mr Chair, they are taking a fair bit of flexibility with the truth. Because that's the reality of what this government is doing. Over 7 years, they have been slowly pedalling back their responsibility in social housing. So I do think that this bill should have its title changed to the Social Housing Reform State House Sell-Off Bill, because that's all that enables this government to do. And at the very beginning of this plan, Mr Chair, this government said, oh, it'll be the likes of the Salvation Army that'll be interested in purchasing these homes and working in our communities and making lives of these people better. They're not interested. They don't want a bar of it. And I've spoken to a local iwi, Mr Chair, who have had experience in this area. They say it doesn't make sense for them to do it. So if the market doesn't work for them and the market is not working for these vulnerable people, who then does the responsibility fall on to make sure people get a decent home in New Zealand? That should be the government. And this piece of legislation is this government washing its hands of this responsibility. Come to Cannons Creek. Come to Ascot Park. Come to Titahi Bay, where there are vacant Housing New Zealand homes and people desperate to get into them. They won't because they don't care, Mr Chair.
Mr Chairman.
I call Chris Hipkins.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman, and I'm very happy to take a